Millionaire CEO betrayed his black wife for his receptionist. Now he begs for a second chance. Hey, beautiful souls. Whether you're a returning viewer or joining us for the first time, welcome to the Alcott Stories family. This is the place where love, passion, and heart-touching moments come to life. Every story here is crafted to stir your emotions, inspire your heart, and leave you with lessons that stay with you forever. So, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on that notification bell because you won't want to miss a single moment of the powerful love stories we bring to you. And if you enjoy our stories, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Your support means the world to us. Now, before we dive into today's journey, let's take a moment for a special blessing from the Alcott Stories family. May your heart always find love, your soul always find peace, and your life be filled with stories that inspire and uplift you. May every tear be wiped away with joy, and may love always find its way to you in the most unexpected yet beautiful ways. Amen. Now sit back, relax, and get ready to dive into today's unforgettable journey. Let's begin. The city of New York glittered under the golden lights of a grand charity gala, an event where the elite gathered, draped in their most exquisite gowns and tailored suits. The venue, an opulent ballroom adorned with cascading chandeliers, echoed with the clinking of champagne glasses and the hum of sophisticated conversation. Among the distinguished guests stood Ethan Caldwell, a man who needed no introduction. Tall, strikingly handsome, and exuding an air of effortless authority, Ethan was the epitome of power. His tailored black tuxedo fit him like a second skin, accentuating his broad shoulders and confident stance. He wasn't just another wealthy businessman, he was a self-made millionaire, a visionary leader who had turned his modest startup into a billion-dollar empire. People admired him, envied him, wanted to be him. Yet behind his composed smile and sharp blue eyes, there was something missing, a void, an emptiness he couldn't explain. Despite all his success, despite the luxury that surrounded him, his life felt incomplete. The women he dated were beautiful, but none had ever touched his soul. His heart longed for something more, something real. As Ethan casually sipped his whiskey, listening to yet another businessman drone on about investments, a sudden shift in the room's energy pulled his attention away. It was as if the very air had changed, as if an unseen force had whispered in his ear to look up. And then he saw her. She wasn't just another guest in the crowd, she was a vision. Sienna Carter. Her skin, a mesmerizing shade of deep, rich brown, glowed under the soft lights, like the finest mahogany. Her eyes, dark, soulful, filled with an unspoken mystery, held a depth that made the world around her fade. Her natural curls framed her delicate face, cascading down her shoulders in a way that seemed almost effortless, yet breathtakingly beautiful. Dressed in a sleek, emerald green gown that hugged her curves perfectly, she moved with a quiet elegance, an aura of confidence and grace that set her apart from everyone else in the room. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Who was she? For the first time in years, he felt his pulse quicken. The women at these events were usually predictable. Trained smiles, rehearsed lines, calculated charm. But this woman, she was different. She carried herself with a quiet strength, a natural allure that wasn't forced. He watched as she politely engaged in conversation with an older gentleman, a soft smile gracing her lips. But there was something in her posture, something guarded, as if she wasn't fully comfortable in this world of extravagance. She didn't belong here, yet she owned the room in a way no one else did. Ethan was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. He wasn't the kind of man who hesitated. He was used to taking what he wanted, making swift decisions without regret. But this time, he found himself rooted in place, hesitant. There was a pull in his chest, something unfamiliar. Was it attraction, curiosity, or something much deeper? He turned to his assistant, who stood nearby. "Who is she?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. The assistant glanced in the direction of Ethan's gaze. "Sienna Carter, works in non-profit, runs a foundation for underprivileged children." Ethan's lips parted slightly. She wasn't just another socialite, another woman looking for a rich man to entertain her. She had purpose. She had a reason to be here, beyond the glittering lights and expensive wine. His interest deepened. With slow, deliberate steps, Ethan made his way across the room, weaving through the guests until he stood just a few feet away from her. When she turned, and their eyes met for the first time, something shifted in the universe. Electricity. Sienna's breath hitched slightly, though she quickly masked it with a composed expression. She had heard of him before. Who hadn't? Ethan Caldwell was a name that carried weight, a man whose reputation preceded him. But meeting him in person, feeling the intensity of his gaze, it was something else entirely. "Ethan Caldwell," he introduced himself smoothly, extending a hand. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking it. "Sienna Carter." Her voice was like silk, smooth and rich, wrapping around him in a way that made his stomach tighten. Their hands touched for barely a moment, yet it was enough for a spark to ignite, a silent promise of something yet to unfold. The night had just begun, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan Caldwell felt truly alive. Ethan had met countless women in his life, models, actresses, business moguls' daughters, but none of them had ever made him feel like this. From the moment his eyes locked onto Sienna Carter, something inside him shifted. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was breathtaking. It was her presence. She was different. She didn't fawn over him like others did. She didn't seem impressed by his wealth or his reputation. She held herself with quiet confidence, meeting his gaze head-on, unafraid. And that intrigued him more than anything. For hours at the gala they talked, their conversation flowing effortlessly. Sienna wasn't just intelligent, she was passionate. She spoke about her non-profit work with fire in her eyes, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen struggle and chosen to fight against it. Ethan listened, captivated. For the first time in years, he wasn't the one leading the conversation. He was the one being drawn in. As the evening wore on, the tension between them grew thicker. Every glance, every accidental brush of their hands sent sparks through the air. Ethan wanted more. He needed more. So as the gala neared its end, he leaned in slightly, his voice low and intimate. "Let me take you to dinner." Sienna hesitated, searching his face as if trying to decide whether he was worth the risk. "Just dinner?" she teased, one eyebrow arching. A slow smirk spread across Ethan's lips. "For now." She laughed softly, but nodded. She was tempted, and for once she let herself give in. The restaurant was one of the most exclusive in the city, a rooftop terrace with a panoramic view of the skyline. The soft hum of a jazz band filled the air, and the golden glow of candlelight flickered between them. Ethan had chosen the perfect setting, but the truth was, he could have taken Sienna to a simple diner and still felt the same intensity between them. They talked, they laughed, they flirted. The world around them blurred, as if they were in their own bubble. Every time Sienna spoke, Ethan found himself leaning in, drawn to her voice, her expressions, the way she bit her lip when she was deep in thought. He barely touched his wine, too lost in the taste of her words. And then there was the touch. It started small, his fingers grazing hers as he passed her a napkin, but neither of them pulled away. Instead, the touch lingered, sending a slow heat through their veins. Sienna's breath hitched slightly. She felt it too. Ethan's blue eyes darkened with something unspoken, something raw. His hand turned, fingers wrapping around hers, thumbs stroking the soft skin of her wrist. "Come with me," he murmured, his voice deep and low. Sienna didn't ask where. She knew. She could have said no. She could have pulled away. But tonight, she didn't want to. The moment the hotel room door shut behind them, the air shifted. The tension that had been simmering between them all night finally ignited. Ethan stood in front of her, his gaze searing, his breath heavy. He reached out, tracing a single finger along her jawline, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. Sienna swallowed hard. She knew she should take a step back, but instead she stepped forward, pressing her hands against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her fingertips. "Don't stop." That was all he needed. His lips crashed against hers, claiming her in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. The kiss was hungry, desperate, filled with all the pent-up desire they had tried to suppress. Ethan's hands roamed her body, memorizing every curve, every dip of her waist. He lifted her effortlessly, pressing her against the wall, their bodies molding together as if they had been made for each other. Sienna's nails dug into his shoulders, her breath coming in soft gasps as he trailed kisses down her neck, along her collarbone. This wasn't just passion. This was need. A raw, undeniable force that neither of them could fight anymore. Clothes were shed, skin met skin, and the room was filled with whispered names and soft moans. They moved together in perfect harmony, like a melody only they could hear. Ethan had never felt this way before, this complete, this consumed. This wasn't just another night. This was something deeper, something dangerous, and he knew, even in the heat of the moment, he would never be the same again. Much later, as they lay tangled in the sheets, the city lights casting shadows across their bare skin, Ethan watched Sienna as she traced lazy patterns on his chest. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was different. He had spent nights with many women, but none had ever made him feel like this. None had ever made him ache for more, even after the passion had faded. Sienna turned to him, her dark eyes searching his. "What now?" she asked softly. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face, his lips curving into a slow smile. "Now, I make sure this isn't the last time." Because he knew one night with Sienna Carter would never be enough, and neither of them was ready to let go just yet. From the moment Ethan left the hotel room that first night, something inside him had changed. He had never been the kind of man to crave something beyond physical attraction. Women were like fine wine, meant to be enjoyed, savored, but never too much of the same bottle. But Sienna was different. She wasn't just a night of passion, she was a fire that refused to burn out. Days passed, but her voice, her touch, her scent still lingered in his mind. He found himself distracted in meetings, zoning out in boardrooms, his mind drifting back to the way her body had melted into his, the way she had gasped his name like a prayer. He needed to see her again. He didn't just want her, he needed her. Their second encounter was supposed to be just one last night, a way for Ethan to get her out of his system. But the moment Sienna opened the door to the penthouse suite, standing there in a silk robe, her bare skin glowing in the soft golden light, he knew he could never get enough. This wasn't just lust, this was something far more dangerous. She let him in, her expression unreadable, but the unspoken words between them were loud enough to shatter glass. No more pretense, no more restraint. Their bodies collided the moment the door clicked shut, hands desperate, lips hungry, as if they had been starving for each other. Clothes were forgotten, breaths mingled in feverish gasps, and as they sank into the soft sheets, the world outside the walls of that suite no longer existed. Sienna wasn't just a woman to him, she was his escape. And Ethan realized, with every whispered moan and every slow, deliberate touch, that he was falling. They spent hours tangled in each other, and when the passion finally slowed, they lay together in the dim glow of the city skyline. Ethan traced circles on her bare shoulder, his mind clouded with thoughts he couldn't shake. What was this? He had told himself this was only temporary. But then, why did he feel like letting go of her would be impossible? Sienna sighed against him, her fingers brushing against his chest as she whispered, "This can't last, can it?" Ethan stiffened. He hated how right she was. But instead of answering, he pulled her closer, pressing a lingering kiss to her forehead. He wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. Their third meeting was different. More than just stolen moments of passion, it was deeper, heavier, unspoken emotions woven between the sheets. Ethan took his time with her that night, his touch reverent, almost tender. They didn't just make love, they memorized each other. Every kiss, every sigh, every whispered name was etched into his soul. He wasn't just addicted to her body, he was addicted to her presence. Sienna, with her warm brown skin against his. Sienna with her laughter that made his chest ache. Sienna, who had unknowingly become the only thing that made him feel alive. And as she lay asleep in his arms, her breath soft and steady, Ethan knew the truth he had been avoiding all along. This wasn't just passion. This was something dangerously close to love. From the moment Ethan left the first night, he knew he was in trouble. He had told himself it was just one night, a fleeting moment of passion that would fade like all the others. But Sienna Carter wasn't like the women who came before her. She wasn't a passing distraction, a temporary indulgence. She was something more, and the worst part, he wanted more. Her scent still clung to his skin, the way her nails had dug into his back, the sound of her soft moans against his ear, the way she had whispered his name like a secret only she was allowed to know. It haunted him. For days, he tried to bury himself in work, convincing himself that he was imagining it. But no matter how many numbers he crunched, no matter how many deals he closed, his mind kept drifting back to her, to the way she had made him feel something real. So when he finally picked up his phone and sent the message, "Meet me again," he already knew he had lost control. And when Sienna said yes, she had no idea. She was falling too. The penthouse suite was bathed in soft golden light, the glow of the city skyline pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The tension between them was thick the moment she stepped inside. Sienna stood there, her deep brown eyes searching his, as if she was questioning why she had come. Maybe she knew deep down that they were walking into something neither of them could handle. But then Ethan stepped forward. He lifted a hand, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. His touch lingered, his fingers tracing the softness of her skin, his blue eyes dark with something unspoken. "Tell me you don't want this." His voice was low, a challenge, a plea. Sienna's breath hitched. She should say no, but she didn't. Instead, she took his face in her hands, pulling him down into a desperate, longing kiss. That night, they didn't just make love. They memorized each other. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered name between gasps was filled with something deeper than lust. Ethan took his time, worshipping every inch of her, mapping the curves of her body as if he were trying to memorize her, knowing he would crave her the moment she was gone. Sienna melted beneath him, her fingers threading through his hair, her soft cries filling the silence of the suite. And when it was over, when they lay tangled in the sheets, skin against skin, Ethan pressed a lingering kiss to her shoulder, holding her close in a way that felt too intimate, too dangerous. But neither of them wanted to let go. Not yet. Ethan knew he had already crossed a line, and yet he didn't stop himself from seeing her again. The third time, there were no more excuses, no more pretending this was just a fleeting affair. Because when Sienna opened the door to the suite, her eyes locking with his, he saw it. The same longing that burned inside of him. They barely made it to the bedroom. Ethan kissed her like a man starved, as if he had spent every second apart from her craving this moment. Their clothes fell to the floor, hands exploring, mouths desperate, bodies pressed together in fiery need. This time the passion was different, slower, deeper. Ethan held her close, their bodies moving in perfect rhythm, his lips never far from hers. It wasn't just about pleasure. It was about feeling, about belonging. And when it was over, when the heat faded into the quiet of the night, Ethan found himself staring at her as she lay beside him, her head resting against his chest. She was beautiful, but it wasn't just her beauty that made his chest ache. It was the way she made him feel whole. And that terrified him, because for the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell was falling in love. Ethan Caldwell had always been a man of control. His world revolved around strategy, business, and calculated risks. But Sienna Carter was the one thing he had never planned for. And yet, she became everything. It had started as an affair, secret meetings, stolen nights filled with passion, but it had evolved into something deeper, something undeniable. Ethan was no longer just drawn to Sienna. He was helplessly in love with her. She had become the warmth in his cold world, the peace in his chaos, and for the first time in his life, he was afraid. Afraid of losing her, afraid that one day she might walk away. So, he made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Ethan wanted his proposal to be unforgettable. He arranged everything in secret, a private yacht, the best champagne, a night of pure magic. The evening was perfect. The sky stretched above them, endless and dark, a canvas of glittering stars. The water shimmered beneath the moonlight, calm and infinite. Soft music played in the background, a melody as gentle as the breeze. And there, in the middle of the vast ocean, with no one else around, Ethan looked at Sienna as if she was the only thing that mattered in the world. She wore a flowing white dress, the silk fabric clinging to her curves, her brown skin glowing under the silver moonlight. She was breathtaking. Ethan had never been so sure of anything in his life. As they stood at the edge of the yacht, looking out at the horizon, he turned to her, his fingers grazing the delicate bracelet on her wrist. "Sienna," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, filled with something raw and real. She turned to him, her deep brown eyes locking onto his. She felt it, the shift in the air, the weight of the moment. Ethan took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket, and then he dropped to one knee. Sienna gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, her heart pounding so loud she swore he could hear it. Ethan held up a stunning diamond ring, the moonlight catching the stone and making it sparkle like the stars above them. But Sienna wasn't looking at the ring. She was looking at him, at the man who had stolen her heart, the man who had made her feel like she belonged in a world she never thought she'd be part of. "I've built my life on power, money, and ambition," Ethan said, his voice deep with emotion. "But none of it matters if I don't have you." Sienna felt her eyes burn with unshed tears. "I love you," Ethan continued, his blue eyes searching hers. "And I don't want to spend another day without knowing you're mine." He exhaled slowly, the rare vulnerability in his expression making her chest tighten. "Marry me, Sienna. Be my wife. Be my forever." Sienna stared at him, overwhelmed. She had never imagined this, never thought that the man she had met in secrecy, the man she had fallen for so deeply, would ask her to be his wife. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she smiled, her voice trembling when she finally whispered the only word that mattered. Yes. From the moment she said yes, their lives became a whirlwind of lavish celebrations and endless press headlines. The powerful CEO and the breathtaking brown-skinned beauty. Their love story captivated the city. Some called it a fairy tale. Others whispered their doubts. But Sienna believed in Ethan. She believed in them. Their wedding was nothing short of a dream. An extravagant ceremony at an elegant estate adorned with thousands of white roses. Celebrities, business moguls, and politicians filled the guest list. The world watched as Ethan Caldwell placed a dazzling diamond ring on Sienna's finger, claiming her as his forever. As he pulled her into a passionate kiss in front of the crowd, Sienna felt it in her heart. This was the beginning of their happily ever after. Or so she thought, because what she didn't know was that someone was about to enter their lives, and one woman would change everything. For Sienna, marriage to Ethan Caldwell felt like something out of a dream. She had stepped into a life she had never imagined, a world of grandeur, wealth, and power. No more late-night shifts, no more struggling to make ends meet. Instead, she woke up in a mansion of glass and marble, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. Every morning she would stretch in the silk sheets of their massive bed, only to find Ethan's strong arms pulling her close, his lips pressing soft kisses along her shoulder. "Good morning, Mrs. Caldwell," he would whisper against her skin, sending shivers down her spine. Sienna had never known a love like this. Ethan adored her. He wasn't just a husband, he was her protector, her provider, her world. He spoiled her endlessly, draping her in designer gowns, filling their home with rare flowers flown in from Paris, surprising her with candlelit dinners on their rooftop terrace. "Anything you want, it's yours," he would say, his blue eyes filled with devotion. But it wasn't the wealth that made her love him. It was the way he looked at her. As if she was his entire universe, as if no one else in the world mattered. When they walked into high society events together, the elite whispered about how a self-made billionaire had fallen madly in love with a brown-skinned beauty. Some were envious, others admired her, but to Sienna, none of it mattered, because in Ethan's arms, she felt safe. She felt loved. She believed in their forever. But in the world of power and wealth, loyalty was a fragile thing. Ethan's life was a whirlwind of business meetings, high-stakes deals, and extravagant corporate parties. And lurking in the shadows of his empire was temptation. Sienna had no idea that soon a new presence would enter their lives. A woman who would shake the very foundation of their marriage. A woman with a dangerous beauty and a hunger for power. A woman who would make Ethan question everything. And without realizing it, Sienna's perfect love story was already beginning to crack. She just hadn't seen the first fracture yet. It started as nothing, a simple hiring decision, a minor detail in the grand scheme of Ethan Caldwell's powerful empire. At least that's what he told himself. Months after marrying Sienna, Ethan's company welcomed a new receptionist, Madison Carter. From the moment she walked into Caldwell Enterprises, she turned heads. Tall, with piercing green eyes and golden waves that cascaded over her shoulders, Madison was the kind of woman who knew exactly how to command a room. She had an effortless elegance, a confidence that made people want to be around her, and Ethan was no exception. At first, he barely noticed her beyond the standard introductions. She was just another employee, another face in the office. But then, things changed. Madison had a way of lingering, of making her presence felt. The subtle brush of her fingers as she handed him documents, the way she leaned just a little too close when discussing schedules, the soft, melodic way she said his name. It was never inappropriate, never anything he could call out. But he felt it. The spark, the pull. At first, he ignored it. He was a married man, a devoted husband. He had everything with Sienna. But Madison was like a whisper in the back of his mind, an undeniable temptation. And what made it worse? She knew exactly what she was doing. Ethan was a man of power, used to being in control. But with Madison, he found himself hesitating, second-guessing. She was flawless, the kind of beauty society worshipped, tall, slender, a model like perfection that the world praised. And she made him feel something dangerous, something he hadn't felt in a long time. A hunger. It started small, longer glances, stolen moments in the hallway. Then she started leaving notes on his desk. "You work too hard, Mr. Caldwell." Playful, flirty. Then there were the late nights at the office, just the two of them. And soon, Madison was no longer just an employee. She was an addiction. And Ethan was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Ethan had always prided himself on his discipline. He was a man who built empires, conquered markets, and made ruthless decisions without hesitation. His mind was sharp, his focus unshakable. But Madison Carter was a temptation unlike any other. At first, he dismissed it. The lingering glances, the subtle flirtations, the way her perfume clung to the air when she walked past his office. He told himself it was harmless, that he loved Sienna, that nothing would ever happen. But temptation has a way of breaking even the strongest men. And Madison knew exactly how to play the game. Madison wasn't just beautiful. She was calculated. She understood power. She knew the kind of men who sat in offices like Ethan's, men who ruled the world but still had their weaknesses, and she was determined to become his. She started small. "You're the most brilliant CEO I've ever worked for." A simple compliment, but one that fed his ego. Then the late nights at the office turned into private conversations. She laughed at his jokes, listened intently as he spoke about his work, leaned in just a little too close when handing him files. Her voice was always soft, teasing. Her green eyes held promises he wasn't supposed to want. Ethan knew he should have put a stop to it, but he didn't. One evening, the air in his office was thick with tension. Ethan was reviewing reports when Madison knocked on the door, stepping inside with a confident smirk. "You work too hard, Mr. Caldwell," she purred, setting down a cup of coffee. "Someone has to," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. She tilted her head, her gaze sweeping over him. "Your wife must be lucky to have a man like you." The words should have reminded him of Sienna. Instead, they stoked a fire. Madison walked behind his chair, her hands grazing his shoulders. "You carry so much stress." Her voice was a whisper, intimate. "Let me take care of you." Ethan stiffened. This was the moment. The moment he could stop it. But he didn't move. He didn't pull away. Because for the first time in a long time, he felt something intoxicating, something dangerous, and he let it happen. That night, Ethan didn't go home early. That night, he let Madison stay in his office longer than she should have. That night, he allowed the first crack in his marriage to form. It was still just a flirtation, still something he could walk away from. But deep down, Ethan knew. This wasn't going to stop. And once he crossed the line, there would be no turning back. Ethan Caldwell had always believed himself to be in control. His life was built on power, discipline, and ambition. He was a man who made calculated decisions, who never let emotion dictate his actions. But on this night, he lost control. It started as any other late night in his office, stacks of reports on his desk, the distant hum of city lights flickering through the windows. Sienna had called earlier, her voice sweet, asking if he would be home soon. "Just another hour, baby," he had said, rubbing his temple. "Go to sleep. I'll be there before you wake up." But he wouldn't, because he wasn't alone, because Madison was still there. And tonight, she wasn't hiding her intentions anymore. "You look exhausted," Madison murmured, stepping closer. Ethan barely looked up. "Long day." She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch light, almost innocent. "Then let me help." He should have moved, should have told her to leave, but instead he let her touch linger. Madison leaned down, her breath warm against his skin. "You deserve more than this stress, Ethan." He exhaled sharply. "Madison, And then she kissed him. Soft, slow, a whisper of lips against his own. For a moment, Ethan froze. His mind screamed at him to push her away, to stop this before it turned into something he couldn't undo. But then, he kissed her back. The hunger he had buried for weeks exploded. The kiss turned urgent, desperate. Clothes fell to the floor. Restraint shattered. Logic dissolved. It wasn't love. It wasn't even affection. It was a moment of selfishness, of weakness. And when it was over, as they lay in the dim glow of his office, reality crashed down like a thunderstorm. Ethan sat up, running a hand over his face. What had he done? Madison, wrapped in his dress shirt, traced a finger down his spine. "You don't have to feel guilty." But he did, because at home, in their bed, Sienna was waiting for him, and she had no idea that tonight he had destroyed her heart. He told himself it was just once, a lapse in judgment, but guilt had a strange way of fading when temptation lingered. Madison wasn't done with him, and now neither was he. One night became two. Two became a full-blown affair. And while Sienna lay beside him at night, whispering, "I love you," into his chest, Ethan was drowning in secrets, drowning in betrayal. And soon Sienna would find out, and when she did, her world would never be the same. At first it was just a feeling, a quiet, nagging pain that settled deep in Sienna's chest. Ethan was changing. The man who once worshipped her, adored her, couldn't keep his hands off her, was now distant. The fire in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by something colder. The kisses became shorter. The late nights at the office became more frequent. The passion that once burned between them had turned into silence. She convinced herself it was stress. He was a CEO, after all. His work demanded him. But in the stillness of their bedroom, when he turned his back to her instead of pulling her into his arms, she knew. Something was wrong. Sienna tried everything. She planned romantic dinners, surprised him at work, dressed in the lingerie he once couldn't resist. But Ethan barely looked at her, barely touched her. Nights spent waiting for him turned into mornings filled with disappointment, excuses, lies. Meetings ran late. "You were asleep when I got home, baby. You're imagining things." But she wasn't. Because when a woman loves a man with every piece of her soul, she feels it, when he starts loving someone else. The first real sign came one evening when she was doing laundry. A faint trace of perfume clung to his suit jacket, a scent that wasn't hers. Her hands trembled as she lifted the fabric to her nose. It was subtle, but intoxicating, floral with a hint of vanilla. Too sweet, too foreign. Her mind raced. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a colleague's perfume lingering after a long meeting. But her heart whispered the truth. And when she checked his phone that night while he was in the shower, her world shattered. There in his messages was a name that had been appearing too often. Madison. And below it, I need you. Can't stop thinking about last night. Sienna's breath caught. Her body went cold. Tears blurred her vision as she scrolled further. Midnight texts, flirtatious messages, and then the final dagger, a hotel reservation. Tomorrow night, room 1205. Her fingers clenched around the phone. She needed to see it with her own eyes. She needed to know. The next night, dressed in a dark coat, heart pounding in her chest, Sienna stood in the hallway of an upscale hotel. Room 1205. The door was slightly ajar. Her fingers trembled as she pushed it open, just enough to see inside. And there he was. Ethan, her husband. The man who once promised her forever. His lips tangled with hers. Madison. Sienna felt her soul rip apart. The man who once kissed her like she was his entire world was now kissing someone else. Her knees buckled. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled back, pressing a hand over her mouth to silence the sob that threatened to escape. She wanted to scream, to run in and demand answers, to throw her wedding ring at him and tell him he had destroyed her. But she couldn't move. Because in that moment, watching the man she loved hold another woman, she realized something terrifying. She had already lost him, and he never even noticed her standing there. Sienna didn't remember how she got home. The night air was cold against her skin, but she felt nothing. Her mind replayed the scene over and over, Ethan's hands on Madison's body, his lips trailing across her skin, the same way he once touched her. She wanted to believe it was a nightmare, but the ache in her chest, the way her breath felt heavy and broken, this was real. And she knew what she had to do. She needed answers. Ethan walked into their penthouse just after midnight. He wasn't expecting her to be awake. He definitely wasn't expecting her to be standing in the dimly lit living room, her eyes swollen from crying, her hands clenched into fists. His steps faltered. Sienna. She lifted her head, her voice shaking. Tell me the truth. Ethan's throat tightened. Sienna, it's late. We can talk in the morning. No. Her voice cracked, but she refused to let the tears fall. Right now, Ethan, are you having an affair? Silence. That was all it took. Not a denial, not a desperate attempt to lie. Just silence. Sienna's heart splintered. She had prayed, begged, for him to tell her she was wrong. But he didn't. Tears welled in her eyes as she took a shaky step forward. Was I never enough for you? Ethan exhaled sharply, dragging a hand down his face. Sienna, it's not that. Then what is it? Her voice broke. Did you ever love me? Or was I just someone to fill your loneliness until something better came along? He flinched. Because he had loved her. He still did. But how could he tell her that when he had destroyed her? When he had thrown away everything they built? For what? A moment of passion? A temporary thrill? Sienna stepped closer, her hands trembling. Look me in the eyes and tell me she means more to you than I do. Ethan swallowed hard. He couldn't. But instead of fighting for her, instead of falling to his knees and begging for forgiveness, he walked away, just turned his back and left her standing there, shattered and alone. He didn't have the courage to face the damage he had done. And Sienna? She watched the love of her life choose another woman over her, and in that moment she vowed she would never beg for a man's love again. Ethan Caldwell had everything: wealth, power, success. But now he had nothing. The penthouse felt hollow, the bed too big, the air too cold. Madison lay beside him, draped in silk sheets, her perfect body wrapped around his. She was everything society deemed desirable: beautiful, young, tempting. But Ethan felt nothing. He stared at the ceiling, drowning in the silence. Regret was a slow, agonizing poison. He reached for his phone, out of habit. For years, there was only one person he wanted to call after a long day. But Sienna's name wasn't there anymore, because he had erased her from his life. The smell of coffee in the morning used to wake him up. Sienna always made it just right: 2 sugars, a splash of cream. She would hum softly, swaying in the kitchen, unaware of how breathtaking she looked in his shirt. Now the kitchen was silent. No coffee, no humming, no Sienna. Ethan ran a hand over his face. He was a fool. How could he not see it before? Madison was lust. Sienna was home. Days turned into weeks. Ethan found himself driving past their old favorite restaurant. He thought of the nights they sat by the window, fingers intertwined, laughing over wine. He remembered how she used to look at him with admiration, love, trust. And now, that look was gone. He had ripped it away. Now, when Sienna looked at him, all he saw was pain. And the worst part, he was the one who put it there. Madison noticed the change. She wrapped her arms around his neck one night, her voice sultry. "You've been distant, baby." Ethan stared at her, finally seeing her for who she really was. She was never Sienna. She never made him feel safe, whole, loved. He closed his eyes. "I think you should leave." Madison laughed, thinking he was joking. "Come on, you don't mean that." But he did. For the first time since his betrayal, he knew what he wanted. Not wealth, not status, not fleeting pleasure. He wanted his wife back. And now he wasn't sure if he would ever get another chance, because some betrayals could never be undone. And maybe Sienna was already gone. Ethan had never felt fear like this before, not in boardroom battles, not when making billion-dollar deals, but standing outside Sienna's new apartment, his hands shaking, his heart pounding. This was true fear. The fear of losing her forever. The woman who had once been his everything, the woman he had thrown away. His fingers hovered over the doorbell. Would she even open the door? Would she hate him? He wouldn't blame her, but he had to try, because living without her was unbearable. The door creaked open, and there she was, Sienna. His breath caught in his throat. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, but her eyes no longer held warmth for him, only guarded pain, only memories of betrayal. She didn't say a word, didn't invite him in, didn't smile, and that hurt more than anything. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "Sienna, I messed up." No reaction, no tears, no anger, just silence. He took a shaky breath. "I was a fool. I let go of a diamond for a cheap stone." Her lips parted slightly, as if the words caught her off guard, but she still didn't speak. So he did. "I lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. I lost you." Ethan's voice trembled as he stepped closer. "I can't eat, I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see you." Her chest rose and fell, but she remained silent, so he kept going. "I was blinded by lust, by something that was never real. And now, I wake up every day wishing I could go back and undo everything." His eyes burned, but he refused to look away. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, I know that. But Sienna, I love you. I have always loved you." Sienna's eyes finally met his, and for the first time he saw her pain, saw the battle happening inside her. A part of her still loved him, but love wasn't enough anymore. She took a deep breath, her voice quiet but strong. "Love didn't stop you from betraying me, Ethan." His heart clenched. "You made me believe in forever, and then you walked away. How do I know you won't do it again?" He had no answer, because he knew. Words weren't enough. He had shattered her trust, and trust wasn't rebuilt with apologies. It was rebuilt with actions. Ethan's throat tightened as he whispered, "Please, tell me there's still hope." Sienna looked at him, her expression unreadable, and then she slowly closed the door, not slamming it, not yelling, just closing it, leaving him standing there, alone, because she wasn't ready to forgive him. And Ethan knew, if he truly wanted her back, he would have to fight for her, not with words, but with everything he had. Sienna had spent nights crying herself to sleep. She had spent days staring at the mirror, wondering if she wasn't enough. But those days were over. She had suffered, yes, but she had also grown. She wasn't the same woman who once believed love alone could keep a man faithful. She had learned the hardest lesson. Love isn't about wealth, beauty, or passion. It's about loyalty, and Ethan had failed her. Ethan came back the next evening. This time, she let him in. Not because she was ready to take him back, but because she had something to say. As they sat across from each other in her small apartment, she studied him. He looked exhausted. His once pristine suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow. The weight of regret was crushing him. But she needed to know, was it real? "Why are you here, Ethan?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. He exhaled sharply. "Because I lost the best thing that ever happened to me, and I don't want to live another day without you." Sienna's heart clenched, but she kept her expression unreadable. "You didn't feel that way when you were with her," she said softly. Ethan flinched. "No," he admitted, his voice raw, "because I was stupid. I was selfish. I let my ego blind me to what I already had." He looked at her, desperation in his eyes. "I don't want anyone else, Sienna. I only want you." She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "You hurt me, Ethan. You broke me in a way I never thought you would." Tears welled in his eyes as he nodded. "I know." Sienna stood, her voice steady. "Love isn't about wealth or beauty, Ethan. It's about loyalty." Ethan felt the words hit him like a punch to the chest. Loyalty. The one thing he hadn't given her when she needed it the most. His knees buckled, and before he could stop himself, he fell to the ground before her. A powerful millionaire CEO, now a broken man at the feet of the woman he betrayed. "I swear to you, Sienna," he choked out, "I will spend the rest of my life proving I can be that man. The man you deserve." She stared down at him, her heart torn. She had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, could she trust him again? Could she love him again? Sienna knelt before him, lifting his chin so their eyes met. "I'm not the same woman you left behind," she whispered. "If you want me back, you'll have to fight for me." Ethan's breath hitched, and for the first time in his life he realized. This was the moment that defined his future. Would he be the man who gave up again, or would he finally prove his love? There was only one choice, and he wouldn't fail her this time. Ethan had once been a man who thought love was about passion, desire, and attraction. But losing Sienna had changed him. For the first time in his life, he understood that love wasn't just about grand gestures, expensive gifts, or whispered words in the dark. It was about trust, and trust, once broken, wasn't easy to rebuild. But he was willing to do whatever it took. So day after day, Ethan chose Sienna. He didn't overwhelm her with empty promises or grand declarations. Instead, he proved his love in the smallest, quietest moments. He called just to hear her voice, but never pressured her to speak. He sent handwritten letters, pouring his heart onto paper, never expecting a response. He showed up, not with flowers or diamonds, but with patience, respect, and honesty. Sienna didn't trust him overnight. She made him wait, made him earn her love back. And for once, Ethan didn't try to rush, because he knew this time he had to get it right. Sienna had always believed in fairy tales, but fairy tales never included betrayal. She had dreamed of forever with Ethan, only to watch him walk away for a moment of weakness. And that pain had changed her. She wasn't the same woman who had once trusted blindly. Now she was stronger. She knew her worth, and she wasn't going to settle for a love that wasn't loyal. That's why she didn't say yes the first time Ethan asked for forgiveness, or the second, or the third. Because forgiveness isn't a gift. It's something that must be earned, and she needed to know. Was Ethan fighting for her because he was lonely, or because he had truly changed? It wasn't one grand event that finally made Sienna believe again. It was a collection of small, quiet moments. The way Ethan never looked at another woman the way he used to. The way he listened to her, truly listened, instead of trying to convince her. The way he let her set the pace, never rushing, never pushing. One evening, months after his betrayal, they sat on a park bench beneath the same stars where he had first proposed. The night was silent. Ethan didn't beg, didn't plead. He just looked at her, eyes filled with quiet regret and unwavering love. And that was the moment Sienna knew. He had finally become the man she deserved. She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "I forgive you." For a moment, Ethan didn't react, as if the words were too impossible to believe, and then he broke. Tears slipped down his face as he dropped his forehead against her hand. "I will never take you for granted again." And this time, she believed him. Their love story wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was real. And in its imperfection, it carried a lesson. Love isn't about beauty. It isn't about passion. It isn't about temptation. It's about loyalty. About choosing one person even when it's difficult. About never letting go of something real for something temporary. Because lust fades. Temptation is everywhere. But true love is a choice. And this time, Ethan chose Sienna. Not just for now, not just until something better came along, but forever. And that's what made all the difference. She was there when he had nothing. Before the wealth, before the fancy suits, before the title of CEO, there was a woman who believed in him. She saw potential in a man others overlooked. She loved him when all he had were dreams, when his pockets were empty but his ambitions were full. She stood beside him when times were tough, when late nights were filled with struggle and early mornings with prayer. She wasn't just his wife, she was his backbone, his greatest supporter, his rock in a world full of uncertainty. She built him up when he doubted himself, reminded him of his worth when the world tried to bring him down. She sacrificed for him, believed in him, and walked through fire just to see him succeed. And then the betrayal came. What hurts more than betrayal is knowing that it came from the person who once swore to love you forever. For a man to cheat on a woman who helped him build his empire is the ultimate form of ingratitude. She was there before the luxury, before the millions, before the power. Yet, when he reached success, he forgot the woman who had been his foundation. Maybe it started as harmless conversations, a few extra minutes at the office, a spark that should have never been entertained. But soon, lines were crossed, promises were broken, and hearts were shattered. The wife who had given everything found herself discarded like an old chapter of his life. While he lived in the thrill of a new romance, she sat in the silence of heartbreak, wondering how the man she gave her soul to could choose temporary passion over lifelong loyalty. The pain of infidelity is not just in the act itself, it's in the memories it destroys, the self-worth it shatters, and the trust it buries. It makes a woman question everything. Was I not enough? Did my love mean nothing? But here's the truth. She was always enough. He was just blind enough to lose sight of what truly mattered. Betrayal has a way of bringing temporary excitement, but once the thrill fades, reality comes crashing down. Now he begs for a second chance. The same man who once thought he could do better than the woman who loved him now realizes he lost the best thing he ever had. The same arms that once embraced another now long for the embrace of the woman he left behind. He thought his receptionist would fill the void, but lust is not love. What he had with his wife was built on trust, on years of struggle and triumph, on a connection that money cannot buy. And once that trust is broken, no amount of apologies can erase the damage done. Regret is a heavy burden to carry, but sometimes it comes too late. Some women walk away, knowing their worth, refusing to accept betrayal as part of their story. But some, with hearts full of love, choose to forgive, not because they are weak, but because they believe in redemption. To the women who give second chances, you are stronger than words can describe. It takes immense courage to look into the eyes of the man who broke you and still choose to love him. But forgiveness is not about erasing the past. It is about expecting a better future. To the men who are lucky enough to receive that forgiveness, do not take it for granted. If she chooses to stay, it is not because she needs you, it is because she believes in love. If she gives you another chance, it is not because she has forgotten what you did. It is because she hopes you will never do it again. A real man does not just say, "I'm sorry." A real man changes. He becomes better. He spends every day proving that he is worthy of the love he almost lost. Men, listen carefully. Do not wait until she is gone to appreciate what you had. Do not wait until you are filled with regret to realize that she was the best thing that ever happened to you. Do not trade loyalty for lust, love for momentary passion, or a queen for someone who was never meant to stay. A woman's love is a treasure. Once lost, it may never be found again. If you have a woman who loves you, protects you, prays for you, and stands by you, cherish her, honor her, respect her. Do not be the man who only values her after he has already lost her, because once trust is broken, even if forgiveness is given, things will never be the same. To the man who betrayed his wife, you can beg, you can cry, you can promise to change, but in the end, the choice is hers. If she forgives you, let this be your wake-up call. Love her like you should have from the beginning. If she walks away, let this be your lesson. Never betray the heart that loved you when you had nothing. And to the women who have been betrayed, you are enough. You always were. His betrayal was not a reflection of your worth, but a revelation of his weakness. Love is a gift. Loyalty is a choice, and not every man deserves a second chance.